And I just want to second what he said. The way that we're going to run this panel is going to be quite conversational, so please do not feel intimidated to come up here. We want as much audience participation as possible. At the end of the day, the goal is for you guys to get the most information and most value out of the session today. So firstly, welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for your time. So the topic, of course, we're talking about is an international perspective on cultural diversity. I want to start off by getting your perspective on Australia and what you think, how culturally diverse are we at the moment when it comes to the workforce? Let's start with you, Kevin.
Well, I think we're culturally diverse as far as the continent, right? We've got at least 20%, I think higher than that, of culturally diverse people. But in my organization, and I'm certain in every other one, it drops off very quickly as you move up through the ranks. You know, if you count down from the CEOs, which are almost not represented, you know, the representation at each level drops and drops and drops. In my own group, you know, I probably have 50% women in the entering from university, and I have my 25% because I generally hire accountants, and they're overrepresented in that field. So we're quite high. But each year, as they move up through the organization, it gets less and less. Now, I've only been around a year in Australia, so I'm not 100% sure why that is, but we have a lot of work to do.
There's a lot of data that certainly suggests the trends you're seeing in your organisation are prevalent across industries. Joanna, what's your take on this?
I mean, I think the same. I think, you know, Australia's supremely diverse. It's a wonderful place to live. It's a great place to live. I'm a migrant myself and went through that whole transition of being in a pecking order, of being accepted as a populist group. And that just seems to be a rite of passage for new immigrants to Australia. But it's a wonderful, wonderful experience in terms of the community experience you have in Australia. In workplaces, it depends where you work. It just depends where you work.
So give us an example. Where is somewhere, you're saying it depends where it works, maybe in somewhere like accounting, like you said, perhaps men are overrepresented, perhaps there isn't as much diversity. Where does it work?
Well, I think it depends on a few things. It depends on who the leaders are of a particular workplace in terms of how they see workforce and what their sense particularly is of the kind of people they want. When you have too much of a club mentality or a cultural monogamy, you tend to see looking like. So the bigger the organisations, the bigger the companies, the bigger the governments, the less likely we are to see that diversity in Australia, I believe, and I would argue that in almost every other country of the world as well. I think when you get down to medium-sized and smaller-sized organisations, and particularly those that are sitting in the civil society sector, you start much greater diversity, and you get, because I think people are more willing to explore and to link with people that are more associated with the issues and the business of that workplace. So if we're an international organisation, we must have an international workforce.
Jason?
Oh, well, I'm an example of the diversity you speak about. I think as a country, we have dealt with the issue of diversity and multiculturalism in my perspective quite well.
So you think Australia has dealt with the issue of diversity quite well, even in the upper echelons of leadership?
No, I was going to say that except that they have not progressed in some areas,
okay.
And that would probably include in the corporate area. That would include the governments and in especially some of those political organization that we have in this country. I think there's a lot of work to be done, like what Kevin is saying. I think we have a lot of work to do on those areas.
Tell us a bit about your story, because I guess you're somebody that has made it, and you know you do stand for cultural diversity. You sit on a couple of big boards. What is it that you think that you did differently, or what worked for you, I should say?
It is I mean, I guess by way of background, I'm not on the elected representation of the country, as in the governments and all those things. I'm not into big business. though I sit on the advisory to the Bank of Melbourne on the Asian.
That's a big business.
But I'm much more on the governmental agency level, the galleries and all those things. What had been different for me, I don't think is different from anyone, I guess, in the room. I guess there must be some luck involved in the process. There must be a commitment to the cause that you are asked to be involved in. But I think one of the things that I think has been missing is the understanding of some of the values of the Australian values, that I call it Australian values that we have in this country. Perhaps I understand it a bit better because I was trained in this country as a lawyer. So the appreciation, for example, of the freedom of speech, the concept of speaking your mind a little bit more, and in general advocate a little bit more about what you believe in. That is one thing. Perhaps I understand the value of what Australia means, that when we talk about the advocating for Australia. The example I would have is that how many of us actually advocate for Australia from our community background in the manner that is accepted by the general community in Australia. I don't think that is generally understood within the community. So those must be some of the difference. I grabbed my opportunity when it came, and I make the best of it.
What do you think about the point that Jason's making about the importance of embracing Australian values in order to be successful?
Well, yeah, I've moved around the world, and I've always kind of believed in when in Rome, do as the Romans do, right? So, I go see rugby union, watching New Zealand thrash Australia, wearing my yellow hat. I do think that you've got to do that. I lived in Asia. I definitely was going to eat meals and eat everything that the Chinese challenged me to do. I very much adopted the view of you have a kind of a lifelong commitment to employees that support you, something that I've kind of continued to carry through. So I think that to travel is to learn, and you should definitely adopt these things. One of the conversations we've had that I really haven't been here long enough to know, but the Chinese culture in particular is extremely good at developing really strong relationships. Right, you have to have a relationship before you can actually do business. But I'm told, and I don't know this because I haven't been around long enough, that here in Australia, because so much of that happens in the bar or at a sporting event, that kind of is not Asian culture, right? That they tend to kind of drop out of that. And it's my Asian colleagues who are saying, do we really have to say, hey, we know how to build relationships. If that has to happen in a bar, we can do that, or at a game, we can do that.
Joanna?
On the other hand, is that really what we want to do as a country?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Just jump in.
I will. I wonder if we can have two mics. It's easier to jump around, but brilliant. I had sort of quite strong reactions to a couple of things. I think it's never about luck. It's always about selection and opportunity based on somebody else's view about who is right for a particular place, job, time, or opportunity. It's never about luck. And in terms of the when in Rome, do as the Romans do, couldn't disagree more.
Well,
And,
I couldn't disagree more
and
either.
you know what? It's really interesting because most people go, what are you talking about? How can you possibly go to somebody else's country and disrespect the cultural norms and the customs and the traditions of that nation? Well, I've worked for 30 years across 30 or more countries, and I speak many languages, and I've lived in many of those countries. And many of the cultural norms and customs of those countries, including this country, suck. And they suck because they are racist, they are sexist, they are exclusionary, they are norms and customs and traditions that are driven by a minority of the population imposed on the majority of a population. The people that made up the customs that decided what the roles of women should be were made by groups of men who were probably at the bar or playing golf together. Women are not at the bar and playing golf together.
But Joanna, I'm going to interrupt you, and I'm going to challenge what you're saying, because you mentioned that you've lived in all these countries and you've spoken all these languages. Isn't just the fact that you have been willing and able to speak these languages, which in turn enables you to communicate with them, mean that you are, in essence, going to the point of what Kevin was saying, when in Rome, doing what the Romans do, keeping in mind, I do agree with your point, that there are, especially in some parts of the world, there are some real extreme sexist, racist policies. But I think that expression goes with, we're all mature adults in this room, we're all professionals, you exercise your better judgment. I mean, you don't have to embrace every policy of a country, but I think the point that he was trying to make was, it would help if you're in China and you speak a bit of Mandarin.
Totally. I don't think I kind of crash my way through the world being rude and obstinate. That's not what I'm doing.
I don't know, though, because you use language that I find unacceptable.
Okay. Well, I find on panels like this that to be provocative is often a bit more entertaining.
But you don't have to be,
So please excuse
but you don't
me.
have to be foul-mouthed.
Excuse me. So I shan't use that crude kind of language
Thank you.
again. And I apologise for offending you. However, now I've completely lost my point, which was
That's
about
debating 101. I knew I could do that to you.
Just being in Rome, doing what the Romans do, and
But choosing.
exercising
Thanks.
Choosing.
So I think because we're talking about Australia in a sort of comparative space to other international styles in terms of embracing diversity, Australia's a really, for all of our diversity, the values that are kind of espoused as Australian values are very narrow and overtly masculine. And it's very difficult, I think, for a great number, many millions of Australians to be able to, it's almost like we're asked to assimilate rather than cooperate or collaborate. And I find that is a somewhat dangerous premise that says we'd prefer, the White Australia policy was the worst example of this, but there are plenty of other discriminatory policies and some slightly dodgy immigration tests in Australia at the moment too, that implies that we want everybody to be the same. And I really challenge whether that is the strongest of our approaches, and it's what I like about the Human Rights Commission and partners' approach, because we'll measure what we value. And if we value diversity and begin to measure our performance and our results by the diverse approaches we take to that, we will find we achieve so much more.
That's an excellent point. We've got someone sitting on the couch, so.
Hi, my name's Phil, and I'm an Australian-born Chinese, so I have been struggling with this for the last over 30 odd years in terms of my identity as an Australian-born Chinese. So, some of these things quite ring true. I guess I just want to ask the panel, on one side of things, you say, okay, do as the Romans do. Others say you need to hold your values.
You need to do both, but you have to choose wisely.
That's what I was about to ask, because in terms of my upbringing, there are some certain things that I hold the line in terms of what I've been brought up with. And look, hey, every now and again I do need to go to a bar and network and all that type of stuff. But in terms of being Hong Kong Chinese, the Guanhei or Guanxi in Mandarin, that relationship building, I guess, number one, I think everyone should try and build relationships, whether it's business or out of a family respect. But I guess the other thing is, if we're all try and make a change comes from one person at a time. So I guess more of a statement rather than a question. I think that's in terms of diversity, going from lots of Asian people being in the lower ranks to perhaps one day being a bit more. that's the challenge.
But no, that's a challenge, but I would also maybe say that it could be an opportunity.
Absolutely.
It is your point of differentiation. The fact that you do have, you're bilingual,
Yep.
you have an understanding of both the cultures. I mean, surely that can be used as an advantage. I mean, Jason, for you come from Malaysia. Can you speak to that point? I mean, you know, like again, sort of coming back to, I guess it's worked for you.
I guess I relate to that very much, but I don't necessarily think that it's inconsistent to have an Australian value and against your culture. I don't think that is inconsistent. Perhaps I've taken the concept of Australian value slightly differently, but my concept of Australian value evolves around the ability to be able to speak your mind as an Australian, right? Assert, advocate, without fear or favor. Coming from Malaysia, there is something called the Sedition Act in Malaysia. If I'm not an Australian citizen today, and if I speak ill of the country, I can be charged. Now, that would not frighten me because I live in Australia. That is that concept of the freedom of ability to speak your mind. It is very important. The Chinese culture has taught me and a lot of people in this room to be a little bit more polite. And perhaps we have to change. Perhaps if you want to be successful in this country, that is one of the fundamental change you need to have. Otherwise, you will come up with the same problem all the time. So I'm encouraging you to think about what Australian values mean to you. It is not about football. It is or rugby. It is about the very basic principle, the freedom of speech of this country, which I think we have forgotten. Yeah.
Of course, I want to suggest once again you'd go to the halfway house. I absolutely think it would help everyone if the Asian community spoke up more. But to move from saying, well, we're polite and we should become rude, right? No, but you know, some people think it's a black and white choice. You have to become more assertive.
Assertive, not aggressive, maybe.
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
But I think the other thing that's really going to change the mark on this is, and it's interesting, you earlier said larger companies tended to be less diverse. My experience, which is somewhat limited, is not that, in that the bigger companies are under a lot more scrutiny, recognize that they've got to look more like their customers, everybody.
So
and a lot of
can
pressure.
you speak to the example of Westpac and tell us what Westpac's doing?
Yeah, Westpac has said we're going to mirror the customer base, right? So in part that's the population of Australia, but it is really the customers coming in, right? So if 50% are not women or 21% are not Asian in the company all the way up, you know, when they go to a board meeting and you're investing in the company, if we don't look representative, it's going to hurt our business. So one of the things that surprised me in the blueprint was they've spent a lot of time trying to convince us that this would be good for business. I'm shocked. I mean, that's been something that I got told. Now, I did grow up in the US. We did have civil rights and riots in the 1960s, and I was old enough to see them if I didn't understand them. So it has been part of my DNA for a long time. But, you know, we've got to do this. And I think the Asian community has got a huge amount of wealth. They are customers, and they should use that power in a informed, intelligent, outspoken way without getting too rude.
Another question?
Hi, mainly I'm a BDM in Westpac Premium here in Melbourne. Thanks to the panel. Some robust discussions here. A couple of things I noted was when he said was lucky, it's more of an Asian thing of being humble rather than saying he's just luck, because everyone works hard to where they have to be. But this is the Asian way, that's what I would say. Coming back to the racist part of things, I feel more at ease in this country than what I was back in my own country. So I won't call Australian racist at all. I think this is such a tolerant society. It gives opportunity. I feel free here. You have freedom of expression, freedom to do what you want to do, and have a destiny in place. You know, the more work I put in, the more rewards I get in this country. So Australia is, I think, in my view, is the most non-racist country, if the word's correct. That's first thing. Second thing is, this is the only country where my client base is 90% mainland Chinese. Yeah, I don't speak the language, but it's the cultural thing. Being Asian background, I know what what sort of service they require. Yeah, they want to feel at home when they see you. They want to feel they are being cared for. Yeah, so these sort of aspects are there, which we bring. This is our cultural thing. Yeah, and in terms of getting the 21% representative Asians, and that's a good thing. I would say that gives opportunity to people to rise because, again, I'm saying it's not a racist country, opportunities, everything. But what I see is I come into the country when I was 28 years old. Now you have graduates starting here, and a couple of my graduate friends are here. They started 18, 19, 20. So you got that 8 year, 10 years, benefit over there. You start from zero again, because obviously somehow this country doesn't recognize the overseas experience and stuff. So which is more again.
Say more about that, because I think you're right. That's something I've never seen before, except here.
Yeah. So so they have 10 years. They're 10 years ahead of us. So obviously by the time I'm 40, they're still in 30s, and they are right up there. So that's probably the reason why you don't see anyone above the RGM level in Westpac system, which is, I think, something with 21%. We might get some representation there, which is well regarded. Other thing is, all the banks that we have good representation in Asia. Westpac has 200 staff in Singapore, and there's a lot of talent there that sort of cross migrates from here and there. But overall, it's a lucky country, but in a cultural way, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, so you got to make your own destiny.
Thank you for your comments. I want to go off a point that he touched on, which is, what do you guys think are the reasons why cultural diversity is maybe not penetrating at the high levels? Obviously, I mean, just look around us. This is a very diverse country, and there are a lot of people that work in whether it's Westpac, whether it's in the banking industry in general. But why are we seeing figures like from this Human Rights Commission report, where that no more than 5% of leaders across business, politics, government are held by non-Anglo-European backgrounds? No more than 5%. It's absurd. So what is happening? Where are things going wrong? I feel like you're shaking your head. You need to say something.
Well, I think probably the first point about that would be it's somewhere between and the collective mindset, isn't it? That decides what a leader is or what a leadership team looks like, I think. And so all of us are full of unconscious bias when it comes to those situations. And we tend to have a sense of what we think it will take to succeed. And your success is measured in many ways: profitability, productivity, engagement, whatever. But there's always a sense of what it'll take to get there. And it's much easier, isn't it, if you have a leadership team where everybody agrees pretty quickly. It's so much more challenging and exciting when you actually have an enormously diverse range of views about how to get to success. But I just think Australia's systems, the architecture of our country, is a very old-fashioned architecture, and it still looks a bit like colonial Britain, you know, and I think that means in itself that it has brought a collective mindset which is full of unconscious bias. I might just pause there.
I think there are two perspectives from my perspective. The first is I think we need a bit more time. You may argue that we are running out of time, but changes takes time. The second thing is the depth of discussion that we have in this country. If you look at the human right publication in July, which is everyone think is great, and Kevin just pointed out one of the bigger thing, omission. You know, it is not the time when we still argue the need for diversity. It is established in my view. The second thing is that they talk about the corporate culture needs to change, but they did not talk about the group that is trying, the diverse group that we talk about has to change too. It is not a one-sided thing. Both sides has to change. If you want to achieve success, I kid you not, if you don't adapt, you will not be accepted as readily as you should be. But we need to adapt. As a new group, this country from a diverse and culturally different background, we need to adapt. The first thing I've argued is to understand the value the Australian ascribe very strongly to. One of them is the freedom of speech. That's my sense. So the depth of discussion at this moment is still shallow.
You're talking about the depth of discussion about the diversity.
Diversity,
Okay, just checking it's not the panel you're talking about. Kevin, tell us about some of the best practices you've seen in the region.
Well, actually, I worked for Wells Fargo, which was extremely successful. Never there, right, but much better than almost any other large company with 300,000. And we basically had 6 practices, right? Senior management, which meant us, right? I was one of the top 10 people reporting to the CEO. Have to take responsibility. You got to measure where your group is every year. You got to, note the progress and where you're not progressing enough. You needed to consider diversity in every action. So we were not allowed to hire if you didn't have a diverse slate. Now, when you first say that, people take a shortcut. It's like, here's the candidate I want to hire, and here's a CV I got off the internet from a woman or a Asian, and I'll say we're there. But the company's definition of a diverse slate was if the person that you choose as the best person doesn't take the job because they've taken another job or they don't want this job, you will offer it to the next 2 people on the list. That's a diverse slate, because when you say this is it, you know that you could be hiring any one of those 3, so you vetted all 3 correctly. And that made a difference. So we had to take it into any hiring decision, any promotion decision, compensation at the end of the year. We did all the tests to make sure that was. And an interesting one was every time a senior person spoke at a meeting, they had to speak about diversity, which is kind of at first I thought, that's a bit strange. But we talk for an hour, senior people, all the time, right? And it really is important that that is part of your message every day. I mean, as a senior person, you speak to somebody, every day or every other day as a group. And that message constantly coming out, a little bit like we always open here in Australia with, the original owners of the land or something, right? I mean, as a person coming in here, a little bit strange, right? We don't do that in the US, but it has an impact over time. And the last thing I would just say is it is an element of time. The US legislated freedoms in '65, and we're not there yet, right? That's 70 years ago. Now, people say that's a bit short, but I came from a working class background, and I could be successful and lucky, and I do believe that luck is an element because a lot of my good friends made different choices, different companies that didn't work out so well. Work hard and get lucky is important, but never in my dreams was I going to become a CEO of a big company, right? You just didn't go to the right school, you didn't have the right table manners, you didn't know how to dress originally. You blew through 35 years kind of getting yourself ready to get where you've gone. Our kids, could be much more successful. So there's a little element of time, but I don't accept that we ever say that's a reason for slow progress. It is the reason progress is slow, but it shouldn't be a justification.
Okay, let's take another question.
Hi, my name's YK Soon. I'm a barrister from Sydney. I just wanted to speak to the matter of cultural unconscious bias. And people don't even realise it. I didn't even realise it because I just realised not too long ago I saw an ad which was for home loans and, this typical happy family stuff. Oh, we've got a house now, we're so happy. And it only just occurred to me that this was the first time I'd ever seen the family, which was Asian, taking out a home loan. And suddenly you think to yourselves, wait, Asian people take out home loans as well, right? If you believe the tabloid press, they're taking all the home loans. But the fact that you had an Asian person there suddenly went, there is an entire segment out there which previously no one had even thought about. And I in my own practice myself, I don't think I've ever done a deal with someone in a bar because I've just asked them out to tea or coffee. And that's where a lot of business happens as well. And I'm sure the people I'm talking to do all their business in bars as well, but tea is perfectly acceptable. And suddenly the idea comes to the head, oh, wait, I've suddenly got a whole range between, 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. where I can also do business. And I think maybe, if there's unconscious bias, it's innocent and can also be equally innocently overcome. That was just my view.
It's such a great comment. I just know exactly what you're describing, and the imagery, I think, particularly in advertising, is really remarkably disappointing in Australia, given our diversity. It is so rare to see the faces of Australia in any kind of advertising. I think it was bad enough from the woman's perspective of how we were perceived as one entity, which was, preferably slim with long blonde hair, and that's what
At-home
apparently
cooking.
all Australian women look like.
At home cooking, taking care of the children.
Well, don't start me on that one.
I know, but that's how they were portrayed.
Don't start me on Mother's Day windows in Target, where we all apparently want dressing gowns, irons and slippers. I think that image around advertising and visual social media stuff around the face of Australia really needs some challenging. And I think it's not going to be enough, because organisations like mine have been challenging this for years. It's not enough to just kind of state your freedom of speech through media, through letters of protest, or perhaps change petitions, or, you might get your 5 minutes on a current affairs show to share your concern about that. It actually needs different kinds of regulations in place that says there is an accountability to diversity, there is an accountability to equality. That means, in every part of our business, we set targets for what we want to achieve. For some reason, when it comes to proportional representation of men and women in our organisations, or of diversity in terms of our public identity and voice, we set no targets. And we don't hold anybody accountable to that. So I think what you're saying is deeply important. The only way I think we can begin to reverse the unconscious bias is, one, call it out. And it's pretty easy to challenge people on that. And two, set some measurable accountabilities to the decision makers. And three, set some targets. And I think we're on a different journey.
That was a really excellent point. Thank you so much for sharing that. But whose responsibility is to call it out? I mean, I think this is an area where we do need more than just the Asian community to stand up and say, hey, we want to be represented on TV. Shouldn't it be coming from the mainstream?
Yeah, everywhere.
That's right. But you also vote with feet, right? You go into whatever business it is, cars, banks, and I want to open up a checking account, but tell me why I'd want a bank here, because I've looked at all the pictures in your place and it doesn't seem like I'm wanted. That's what changed it in the United States. And I can remember when we've celebrated, when was the first, African-American couple on a TV show? And was the first time we had an interracial kiss, which, by the way, everyone in this room, and if you're in America would know, William Shatner in Star Trek. I can't give you a year, but right? So, yeah, I mean, it's like, where am I represented here? Now, we in Westpac are beginning to do that, great, but, it's got to come with all the rest. And I agree with you with targets, although what we've always wanted to see was, we know where we're going, I know our company knows where we're going, equal the population. Measure where you are, and every year there's got to be progress. If you say it's got to be 30%, then you end up actually with that tokenism that we went through in the 70s, where people wanted a target and they hired an inappropriate person. People worked kind of around them, and then they were destined for failure, and then it leaves they can't do it. Terrible.
I want to talk more about quotas and targets, but did you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I'm a businessman, I suppose. I do it differently. Yeah. My perspective with it is that not that I do not challenge the unconscious biasness of the society. In fact, I work around it and says that, it is their loss if they don't accept it. I benefit greatly if they are not caught up with what I can do. I have a great advantage from a business perspective because I understand the language, I understand the culture, I understand how it works, and I'll be more successful. If you guys doesn't want to join me, tough, I'll do it myself.
It's a different approach.
Yeah.
Hi everybody, my name is William Lai. I'm a member of the Asian Australian Lawyers Association, and thank you for a very stimulating start. At the outset, I'd like to welcome our friends, lawyers from the Jiangsu province, all the way in China. And there's about 24 of them here today, so
Wow.
hopefully you'll make them welcome. Now, in a sense, they are watching us. They are watching an egalitarian society like Australia that values fair go, mateship, a chance of equality, and yet they see that there's a discrepancy at the apex of our leadership. Why is that so? I've been here for 34 years. I first came to Australia, I banked with Westpac. But I don't bank with Westpac now because Westpac never chased the Asian client for some reason. But thankfully, you've come around. And it's good for us. And I think we can celebrate diversity, but there's a lot of pain in suffering unconscious bias. It's easy to call people names, and we all live through that. As a barrister, I've had that. And when I became barrister, there was no one else for at least 10 years at the Victorian Bar. So I felt not racially discriminated, but there's always that underlying thing, you know, people are trying to be polite. I never felt overt racism, but I can understand very deeply about unconscious bias because we're stereotyped. Even our last senior counsel of Sri Lankan ethnicity, he felt that. They thought that he was a worker. And often I would hear him say by the lips, "Excuse me, I would have you know I am one of Her Majesty's counsel." And it's because of the color of his skin. And like me, I've been called names, walking past the corridor of Owen Dixon Chambers. They can't remember my name, they call me Charlie. So all those kinds of things are not so painful. But what is painful is that you're not given a chance. You think you're second class. Now, I've learned a lot from the Jiangsu lawyers. Did you know that there are 300,000 licensed lawyers in China out of 1.3 billion people? And to pass the examinations to be a licensed lawyer, it's an arduous process of study. And the pass rate is less than 10%. And a lot of them go overseas and get a postgraduate degree and study really hard. So when they come here, the land of the free and plenty of opportunity, where are we in 2016 when William Arquette, the first barrister, got admitted to the Victorian Bar in 1904? The Chinese were here as one of the 5 groups: the English, the Scottish, the Irish, the Germans, and the Chinese. So why is it that, how much more time do we have, you know, a function of time? Really?
Hang on, but have you seen the change over 35 years?
I have seen the change in terms of the middle range. I have seen, the question is whether we are assimilating or we are acculturating. And I think I agree with Jason, we've got to contribute to this society. We are only to blame if we don't. But I also think that what the Australian Human Rights Commission through Tim Supamasan put out is a very important document that either people will take it or not, because it sets the conversation that we never had. The Human Rights Commission now has given us a marker. Where are we going to be in 100 years' time, or 50 years' time, or 20 years' time? Are we going to take charge of the blueprint that sets out, let's have skin in the game. Let's call out on things like unconscious bias. Racism exists everywhere in the world, let's face it. And the difference with the US is you have a Bill of Rights. Sure, you've got a lot of different issues, but maybe because we are a country that have a lot of hang-ups. We've got a lot of baggage from our history, from the past. And maybe it's time to think about positive ways to move forward. Why are we, business people, giving money to various parties, political, when we don't even have a voice?
Okay, I'm gonna take some of your points and throw them to you guys. First of all, do you want to respond to what he was saying?
Yeah, except the Bill of Rights is a good start, but actually it doesn't have discrimination in there. It took all the rules in 64, 65 to actually make it illegal to discriminate. Now, being illegal is just like every other crime. It doesn't stop tomorrow because we made murder or thievery illegal, right? It still goes on, but at least it can be punished and tracked down. But I agree with you. It's I hate to think of it as a time thing, like I've moved back in time, but it is certainly less of an issue here and only becoming mainstream here. And it has really been in America all my life, even though it's not gotten better. I think what you're missing was you should have had a violent break with England. Back around 1789.
Okay, let's talk about some of the potential solutions. Where do we stand on quotas?
Well, I believe you have to have targets. And I would set them carefully because the key is to make them better every day, right? If you start off, you must have 50%. You're going to go out and hire, and you're going to end up in a bad place because too many of them are going to fail, and then we're going to have statistical proof that we were right all along. We do not want to let that happen. That happened in America in the 70s. But you got to have targets.
Quotas are just a strategic plan with targets. That's all they are. But there is, in the space that I work in, which is women's rights and gender equality, quotas are the only thing that has ever worked. If you look at the results of the most recent Australian election, one of our two major parties has a quota system for pre-selection of candidates standing for federal membership of Parliament, and the other major party does not. The quota of the first party was 40%. We have 40% female members of Parliament from that party now in our government. The party that does not have quotas has 14% and is going backwards, and we now have less women in the Australian federal Parliament than we had 25 years ago. So all parties, and I'm thinking politically, all parties at all levels of government in all states must have quotas. And I think if we can start with gender, we will find ourselves on a very rapid path that looks a lot more like cultural diversity as well. But if you turn it around the other way and we're to say, let's try quotas, that is looking at measurable movement towards racial and cultural diversity, it risks still seeing 100% men in those situations. This is not helping. No offence to all the men. If we start with 50-50 men and women and say the diversity, the first step of that is the equal representation of the sexes, then we've got a really strong base, because it's extremely likely if you open up from the singular kind of identity that we have now, it naturally unfolds into cultural diversity as well. So chicken and egg, horse and cart, I think quotas all the way at all levels. Let's start with gender.
Okay, but you mentioned gender diversity versus cultural diversity. I mean, do they have to be mutually exclusive? Can't they both can just happen at the same time?
They can, but to ask everybody to take on both at the same time
You need a win.
is probably slowing the whole thing down. You need to say, let's work out how to think differently in this space, and that may in turn
you know, once we open ourselves up to thinking differently, it gets much easier every time you do it.
Now in Malaysia, there's been a system of quotas,
Yes.
which perhaps has not been the most successful. Can you tell us about that?
You mean the NEP and all those things? Well, is an example that you should not follow here. I left the country because of those reasons, so I'm not a big advocate of those things. I don't believe in quotas, by the way. I think that I'm balancing it between merits and versus quota. So I'm not resolved in my mind whether quota is the best way to assert yourself to advocate or it's through merit. And perhaps it's because of my own position. I mean, I was the chair of the foundation at the NGV, so I mean, I was the pinnacle of the institution. I'm the chair of audit in the NGA, so I'm at the pinnacle of those organizations. So I don't see the same issue as they do. Perhaps that's a bit biased, but I think the issue that troubles me is balancing between quotas versus the merit argument that I think I'm sure you're aware
So
of.
quotas versus merit.
Yeah, the ability to get to where you are and where you should be versus that we impose and then get a lesser quality people and the balance between those. Yeah.
But again, I would argue that they might not be mutually exclusive.
Yes.
There can be a quota for a woman, and that woman has the merit to be there as well. The only thing you're doing is saying, we're going to give a third of the board.
A target is
Have them
different
to
from
be
quotas,
women.
I feel. A target is a different argument. A target is an expression of what we want to go. A quota is a set that you have to. That is a bit more rigid in my view. So I differentiate between two. Yeah. I probably accept a target. Yeah.
Can I ask you though, since one party has 40% women and the other have 14, and 50% of the voters are women, why did not that party sweep in with a 70% majority? Are women actually not supporting this?
That's quite a complex question, but
In the U.S., one party jumped up, the other would have to match it, or they'd be gone the next election. I actually am a little surprised that that's just
Okay, we'll leave that. We'll go to.
I'd say
it.
watch this space.
Yeah.
I think if I answer that, I'm going to take the evening down a different pathway, so
Yeah.
I'm a little reluctant to do
And
that.
we've got-
Watch the space, I think, is the right way,
Yes.
and that's what's going to make the change.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, good evening. My name is Melville Miranda. I'm a law student. I came to this country 29 years ago. I was a lawyer in India for 18 years and was asked to go back to law school to redo the course, though I was a first class first in Bombay University, contributed to Indian judiciary. I come from a family of scholars. My brother is a first class first from the Indian Institute of Technology, a gold medalist. He's an aerospace engineer. When he came here 35 years ago, he was asked to clean toilets. Time has passed. His children are gold medalists, rank holders in Australia, both from Melbourne Uni. They're all specialists today. They're about 35 and 37, but they are still rejected at jobs. And they infer it's racism. And I am a gold medalist. I'm a vice chancellor scholar at law. I'm rejected at every law firm. And I was given feedback in Melbourne law firms, that I was rejected because I've got on my CV Indian experience, which I've asked to erase and to change my name to an Australian. So whatever the panel says about this country is, be in Rome, what Romans are, I disagree and pose a challenge. Now there's a good research come in the Australian a few days ago. Racism worsens divide on migrants, which was led by Andrew Marcus from Monash University. It shows that 19% of third generation Australians still say there are too many migrants. My question to you is, this is recent, 2 days ago. Where's Australia moving? And I'm writing a paper on Section 18C on hate law. And there, every day, it comes in the paper about Section 80C, which is not tackled at all by politicians. Now, can this panel, reply to my question, please.
Thank you so much for your question. Do you want to take it on, Joanna?
I respect and I empathise to some extent with the story you're describing. I share your views because I think 18C is very important. I think we've got to go beyond a media debate on 18C and read 18D as well, but I think you probably know what I'm talking about there. My concern about this picture is that we don't seem as a nation to be able to grow up in a way that celebrates our peace and our freedom and our diversity on this planet. For some reason, there is a reluctance to celebrate that in a way that gives more people more chances. What I'm observing from the place which I work in, which is in international development, with a particular lens on international humanitarian law and human rights, is that both in Australia and all other nations in the world, a possible exception of Canada, is that there is a significant and worrying shrinking of civil society and of civil liberties. The voice of dissent, particularly from non-government spaces, is one that has been curtailed and controlled in ways that I haven't seen for 30 years. And I think this is a real concern. So if that control, this links with the leadership question again, is a control that leaves us in a situation where that narrow mindset decides what can and can't be said and who will and won't speak, and what you can or can't speak up about in terms of naming it and shaming it when it's sexism or racism or discrimination or exclusion or exploitation, then we're in big trouble. And wherever I'm looking at the moment, I'm deeply concerned by what I see occurring in Cambodia. Their NGO laws and a significant increase of arrests from civil society leaders is very disturbing and worrying. And the same thing is happening here in Australia. So I'm with you on this. I'm not sure I can answer your question exactly, except to say I think you're right. And I think for those of us in a legal and a judicial space, the issue around civil liberties and justice has never been more important. Holding on to what is our right, universal right, to hold and frame an opinion and to hold and frame an identity is a universal right. Our governments cannot take that away from us. We all signed on to those Universal Declaration of Human Rights conventions.
Jason?
Before I answer the question, I just want to go back to your previous question about what should we do going forward. And I actually put a note down for this meeting, and I thought I'd share it before I forget about it. If you look at the Human Rights Commission report, I think it's concise, but I don't believe that it is adequate, and I don't think the discussion is extensive enough in my perspective. But what they need to do beyond that is to condense it into a very sharp, what I call the elevator speech concept. Until you're able to do that, you're not able to get this message across. I don't think it's about trying to justify the existence of diversity or the benefit of diversity. I think it's so established. I think if they're smart, they will redo it a little bit and change the perspective and then condense it so that it become more productive going forward. I believe it will become much more useful if they do. That's my perspective. On the question of racism, I come from a country called Malaysia. I submit to you, they are more racist than Australia. And therefore, I do not accept that Australia is racist. I would defend Australians.
No, I'm talking of the research in the Australia.
So I think that's wrong. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So I'll defend the concept that Australia is not racist. Yeah. Because I come from Malaysia.
And I think everyone has different experiences of life in Australia. We also heard from a gentleman earlier who was from India, so different. So, but we do respect. Thank you so much for sharing your story and asking that question. I'm conscious of time. We've only got another, say, 5-10 minutes. Do you want to jump in and ask a question? Yes. And are there any women that want to ask a question? Please. This is all about diversity, so please feel free to come forward. Go on.
Yeah. Not too much questions, just want to make several comments about the diversity issues. Like, my name is Ifan, I'm from China, and I came to Australia 2.5 years ago. International student, second language, English. So although second language, I still can speak English to communicate with you guys. The thing is, like, for me, it's not really about diversity. I think Australia had too much concern about diversity. We think about diversity is really bad in this country, but for me, it's really good. It's not racist country in the world. I would say it's do a pretty good job on diversity issues. The thing is, like, why some people concerned about, like, there's only 5% people in executive positions of a big corporations. The thing is, like, if you want to be an executive, you need to show your competence, not show your race. I'm a Chinese, so you deserve to a certain quarter, certain percentage position in a big company. Why? You should have got merits. You should know how to, it's for a private company. You should know how to make money for the company.
Yes, but what we're trying to understand is that given the fact that there are so many Asians, are we saying that they're not good enough to be at the board?
No, the thing is,
what is happening right now? I think that's why we're looking at this data.
From corporation perspective, because as private, I'm not discussing about any public organizations. The thing in terms of private company, the thing is, no matter you're Chinese, white, whatever culture you're from, the thing is you need to know who are the clients, who are the customers, how could you get money from them. If you are white people, then you can get money from the Chinese clients, and you are the best sellers from this company. There's like no position for Chinese people. So I'm slightly disagree about your suggestion that set a quota in maybe Parliament, maybe right. But if it's a private organizations, I disagree about it. So the thing should be, it's a merit base. It's a merit base.
So isn't it strange though that in this country and many other countries, that apparently the only people with the merit to get the top jobs happen to be Anglo-Celtic? Isn't that strange?
For me, that's strange. The thing is,
it's not strange. It is unconscious bias.
Yes, exactly. But the thing is, it depends on several years history. It's about education received by all the people, Anglo-Saxon, male, white people. Actually, not others. They receive the best education in the future, in the past. But the thing is, we start from now. It takes time. It's not set something hard standard, like we can use in soft skills to educate them from a minority, race or gender, and then it takes some time for the education. That's what should education do, not something we should do it now as a current whatever policy.
Okay, because in the interest of time, I'm just going to quickly respond. I'm just going to. Going off your point, and we have I think, do you want to come and ask a question as well? So just jump in the chair. But I think just to sort of wrap up this quota issue, I think the research has shown that quotas do work to a certain extent, but there has to be yeah, exactly, a process within it, a desire that the culture has to be there as well. Yes, go on.
Just representing all the women in the audience, I figured someone had to ask the question, right? So my question is going to be a quick one. Given that on the panel we've got quite successful people in your fields, what would you advise the women and the lower ranks of the Asian in the organisations? How would you suggest that to support us to move higher up?
Yeah, great last question. That's going to be the last question. We'll go around and get the advice. Thank you.
So I actually mentor the high-performing women in my department because I do think this is critical. And some will take my advice and some won't. But in the Asian space, somewhat across in women, is you've got to speak up and tell people, this is what I want. You know, I would not let my manager assume that I'm working for a few years before I go off and do something at home, right? It's like, I've got the skill set, I show up, I work hard, I want to know what it's going to take to the next level. And, you know, what are those steps? But in an assertive way, say it often, say it like each time we're talking about performance, right? It does affect your manager. I know who are the people in my office saying they want to get promoted, men and women, because there's a number of men who are not really interested in careers either, and you know, it's easy to pass on because they never ask you about it, right? Don't let yourself, if you want to move up, say, well, if I work hard, they'll see my work. They want to know that you want it, and you want to know what it is going to take to get there, right? Really I would bang on the door often to every level of people who you talk to.
Great advice.
And if the door is locked,
Well, no one's in there.
as it very often is to women in workforces, there is, I completely agree, the confidence that we have and need to build for ourselves as individuals to imagine the best job we possibly want. Imagine it and go for it. And I think you're quite right, Kevin. Take yourself on that journey and work and surround yourself with people that build that confidence in you to do that. Pick your friends, pick your mentors, pick your colleagues, build that confidence and enjoy the ride. But when the door is locked, you can't do it on your own. So those of you in workplaces that think it's a great idea to have men and women in a team, any team, get together on this and go as a group to your decision makers or authority figures or points of influence and talk about the subject. It's very hard to find a business anywhere in Australia that doesn't get the benefits of having gender equality. But if they don't have it, they may not know how to go about that. You can be part of imagining the future. So think collective when you need to, and surround yourself with people that make you feel great about yourself. Imagine your future and go and get it.
Fantastic. And Jason?
And vote with your feet. I'd say if the door is locked, find another company, because there's a lot of companies figuring it out.
Yeah, true. Very true.
Let me give you an advice when you deal with Kevin. I said, let me give you an advice when you deal with Kevin.
Yeah, come
you
join
should
me.
advocate.
I don't hire
think
lawyers,
the
though,
group
only
here should
accountants.
advocate with senior management with Westpac. Ask them to change the selection panel at the human resource level. That is something that y'all should do, because it's the same old approach from the corporate level. Change the selection panel, because I've chaired selection before and I know what difference it can make.
Yep.
So do that, everyone. Advocate for a change in the selection panel. But aside from that, I think that there is a change of attitude here is required. We are culturally different in Australia. I've said that many times again. We need to adjust and adapt. Advocating with firmness and assertions and with good arguments is the way to go.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please put your hands together for all the panellists and everyone else present today?